Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the great honor this evening of being able to introduce our next speaker, our first keynote speaker for the evening, General Mikhail Kostarakos, who is the current chairman of the EU Military Committee. When I introduced myself to him and told him I would be introducing him, he said, as a typical military officer, keep it short and sweet so I can get up and address. So I will try to do that, sir. First, we're very honored to have him. He's a man of many talents, much experience, and it's really a joy for me to be able to go down a limited number of his achievements. He's obviously well qualified as a military officer. He has attained the highest rank in the Army of the Hellenic Republic. He's a 1978 graduate of the Hellenic Military Academy. He was commissioned as an artillery officer, and he served in field artillery and air defense artillery positions, all the way from the most junior through battery, battalion, brigade, division, corps, command, ultimately ending up as the chief of the Hellenic National Defense Staff. As he was going along, he received many awards and decorations. Among those are two that I find very interesting, because these were not solely military decorations. These were decorations given by the Hellenic Republic to citizens who have done something extraordinary for the Republic. It includes military officers, but it includes officers and individuals from all parts of the society. He's a recipient of the Grand Cross of the Order of the Phoenix and the Commander's High Cross of the Order of Honor. Those are the two that are not only military awards, but also awards for those within the society that excel. He's also well educated. Not only has he been through all the initial military schooling as a junior officer, but he's also attended a number of war colleges, the Hellenic Army War College, the NATO Defense College, and the Hellenic National Defense College. And as is true with any senior officer these days, once you get to a certain rank, it's not just military proficiency that's required, it's the ability to interact with political decision makers, to sort of be a diplomat. And General Kostarakos has also attained degrees in political science from the law faculty at the University of Athens, and also an MSc degree in diplomatic and strategic studies. So let me at this point say, we are delighted to have him here, and sir, the podium is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank for the kind words I heard about myself. Maybe it's more than I deserve. The second thing is that I want to share with you. I was not aware that it was a tribute to President Shimon Peres here. And I want to share with you something which strikes me, and that's something that happened in my past. I will cut 3 pages of my presentation just to share this with you. And this is something a few years ago, in one of my visits in Israel, together with some ministers of the Hellenic Republic, who have been received by President Peres. And it was the normal political discussion he had with the ministers about the situation in the Balkans, in Middle East, in the world, in the UN, and all this. I didn't know him. And suddenly, I heard a man of wisdom, extremely thoughtful, with great views, modern views, and I was fascinated. And I didn't have a paper with me. I wanted to write down what I was hearing. And I was hesitating. It was a protocol. We were at his office. I couldn't stand up and go out and take a paper. And I was trying to put this in my mind, I mean, to remember them afterwards. It was one of the most remarkable discussions I have followed, and I was so impressive. He was so impressive. I was so impressed with what I've heard. As you understand, very few things I was able to keep in my mind, and I still, whenever I hear about him, I feel sorry for myself for hesitating to ask for a piece of paper to write down what he was talking about. It was so important and so thoughtful. I just wanted to share this with you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here in this part of your conference. So let me introduce myself and the committee I chair. The EU Military Committee is a military committee consisting of the 28 Chiefs of Defense of all the 28 member states of the European Union. Since 2003, the EU decided to establish this military committee as a permanent body with a chair, with a chairman. The chairman is one of these 28 judges, usually a 4-star general, always a 4-star general, who is elected with a secret voting on the table, on the spot, by these 28 chiefs for a 3-year term. Usually in the armed forces, we don't elect people, we appoint people. But this is the only, probably internationally, case where the military is electing the one who will be in charge. So here I am. I was elected by my 28 peers, and I'm the former Chief of Defense of the Greek Armed Forces, and I'm making the special reference to the election because this, being elected, gives me extra strength because of the democracy rule, which says that the elected officials have extra status and they are not considered as bureaucrats or technocrats, and they are always subjects to other elected officials and not to appointed technocrats. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, and that gives to the military of the EU a special status. So back in business, it is a great honor for me to be here. Kindly invited my good friend General Amos Gilad, and to address the 17th annual Herzliya Conference. I have to say that I'm very happy seeing again Amos. From my previous positions, we both believe we provided very good services to the Greek and the Israeli people. Today I represent in front of you a union of 28 democracies, well, 27 after Brexit, the European Union. I use the term democracy because it is the one main thing that unites Israel and the European Union, a common characteristic between us which makes communicating, understanding, and cooperating easier. Because democracies, as you are very well aware, are built on common values which go beyond cultural, religious, or other differences. And democracies create bridges, and these bridges have been created between Israeli and European people. And I cannot but add here that when next year the State of Israel celebrates the 17th anniversary, it will also celebrate 70 years of continuous democratic rule. And this puts Israel in the list with the oldest democracies and the most stable ones. And you should be very proud of it. These bridges brings us closer in more ways than energy, trade, tourism, or converging geopolitical interests can. They also put us together against contemporary threats, which unfortunately flourish in our region. Terrorism, violent extremism, Islamic fundamentalism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, state fragility, revisionism and challenges or redrawing of internationally recognized borders, disputes over the ownership of scarce resources in conjunction with climate change, energy insecurity, the list continues. And all these challenges, concerns, and threats are shared between the European Union, our member states, and also they are shared with Israel. Democracy is undoubtedly the finest type of government. Democratic nations draw their power from the people, and therefore, at least theoretically, they are strong and resilient. Their source of strength, the people, is also their center of gravity, which makes them also the ultimate target of our enemies. We have witnessed during the last years the artistic manipulation of public opinion through an orchestrated use of social media and the web. Barbaric actions and cruel messages are being transmitted through modern means wrapped in pretty packaging. Their aim is to infuse terror and suspicion in the hearts and minds of the Western societies, turning people against each other in order to divide us, weaken us, and finally destroy us. At the same time, the campaign aims to disorientate, lure, and recruit the weakest or the less stable between the members of our societies, of the European societies. My friends in the anti-radicalized centers, Muslims themselves, they insist that they can turn a person from a nightclub fan into a Muslim martyr in 2 weeks' time. This sounds scaring, and I know that you share this with me. These actors, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and its affiliates, they do not recognize the rules that constitute the rules-based global order. They do not respond to calls for restraint, and they do not care for negotiations. They do not put limits in their brutality or their objectives. They are a cancer that continuously metastasizes to new regions, such as the Philippines most recently. Their physical defeat on the ground does not mean that the sperm for a future re-emergence has been extinct as well. If Syria and Iraq is lost to them, they will try to move. They have already tried to move elsewhere, Libya, the Philippines, Indonesia, or Myanmar. As long as bad governance, corruption, poverty, hunger, unemployment, religious or ethnic discrimination that lead to social exclusion or purges prevail in any given part of the world, fertile ground will be found for this kind of terrorist groups to rise again. People living under these conditions are left with only two options: migrations or uprising. None of them are favorable to us. None of them are favorable to them. I'm sure that they would also love to have a third option which is also our favorite, to stay home. And this is what we're trying to make them do, stay home. The threats that I have described are of major concern to the European citizens. Although consciously resisting succumbing to fear, they demand from their governments to restate the security feeling that has been shaken. There are usually two obvious ways to provide security. The first one is to build walls and fences to keep evil away. That would be the easiest and quickest way to turn Mediterranean from a bridge to a water trench. But there is no barrier or wall the desperate or the determined will not eventually cross. Borders, physical or digital, can never be airtight. Europeans choose the difficult way. They choose to help provide that third option, to make people stay home, to the people in need. They rejected isolation as it is a policy totally alien to their history and their mindset. The European Union Global Strategy, presented by the High Representative, Madame Federica Mogherini, and welcomed by the European Council of June 2016, is the European common response to contemporary threats and challenges. And it is all about openness, inclusion, and cooperation. It is about reaching out to those in need, not about exclusion or demonization. It is a strategy totally in line with the status and the responsibility of the European Union. And this is the status of a superpower and of a reliable global security provider. I use the term superpower. This term is usually reserved for nations that maintain extensive military capabilities, possesses nuclear capabilities, and have a tendency to politically or otherwise intervene globally in order to forward specific agendas or to impose favorable behaviors. That is not indicative of the European approach or behavior in the international arena. Yet I do not need to remind this high-level audience that the cumulative power of a nation possesses or an institution, as in the case of the European Union, is the sum of this diplomatic, information, military, economic, cultural, and other elements of power. So, having the combination of all these factors of power, we have designed our approach to the world scene, which is called integrated approach. An approach that aims to address all policy dimensions of a conflict. It is multidimensional, multi-phased, multilateral, multi-level. Integrated approach does this by bringing together multiple means of engagement, such as diplomatic engagement, common security and defense policy, missions and operations, development, cooperation, humanitarian assistance. The integrated approach describes the separate phases of conflict, aiming to identify the instruments and tools that are appropriate to each of the phases. It streamlines, operationalizes, and deepens the comprehensive approach we had until now. We are going deeper and faster and in a more significant way. In this regard, the European Union easily qualifies as a superpower. In the diplomatic domain, it is represented in almost each and every nation in the world and in international organizations. Economically, it is the biggest market in the world, the first humanitarian donor worldwide offering close to 1 billion euros annually, the first provider of development assistance with an annual budget of almost 140 billion euros up to 2020, the first trade partner for most of the countries and regions in the world, the second world economy. The EU is also the first trading partner for Israel, with total trade amounting to approximately 34.3 billion in 2016. The figures are astonishing. I'm sure that you are all familiar with this. But this diplomatic economic power created an unintended problem in the near past. It was the reason behind the euphoria that overwhelmed the European leaders of the time. The perception that development was the answer, no matter what the question was, led to an unwillingness to consider and plan for the development of the other pillar of power, the military one. Actually, and in view of the geostrategic developments in the region following the end of the Cold War, a shrinking of the existing military capabilities of the EU member states took place. Despite that, the European Union launched more than a dozen of military missions and operations. It still runs 6 of them as we speak, mainly in Africa, with 3 training missions deployed there, but also in our own backyard in Europe, in Bosnia. Our presence in Africa, although labeled military, has little, if anything, to do with traditional military tasks. Our missions in Mali, the Central African Republic, and Somalia are not of an executive character. Europe does not provide security in the old-fashioned interpretation of the term through the use of weaponry. Instead, we are engaged in a capacity-building mission to the benefit of the concerned institutions of the host nations. That is the reason our missions are not executive and are called training. This is the only way to achieve a sustainable, safe, and secure environment. It has to be created by the locals, with the locals, for the locals. So we are there providing training, sharing best practices and know-how, promoting the law of war and the democratic oversight of the military by democratically elected governments. This is their only hope, the only hope of the locals for development, for growth, for better quality of life. And finally, this is the only way we have to make them voluntarily stay home. At the same time, we also run 3 executive operations. 2 of them are in the maritime domain. There are EU Naval Force Operation Atalanta in the Horn of Africa, EU Naval Force Mediterranean Operation Sophia in the center of the Mediterranean Sea, and EU4 Operation Althea in Bosnia. Through the maritime operations, we are making sure that vital sea lines of communication remain open and undisrupted, since we are heavily dependent on maritime trade. And of course, we are facing the pirates down there, and to protect ships under the World Food Programme, we disrupt migrant smugglers or traffickers' business model while saving thousands of lives of refugees, and we build the capacity of the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy to take on their own responsibilities. We contribute to the implementation of the UN arms embargo imposed mainly against ISIS, and in the case of Operation Althea in Bosnia, we create a safe and secure environment in the heart of Europe and Bosnia. Ladies and gentlemen, as you understand, the European Union acknowledges that it is to its best interest to have stable, resilient, and secure nations, not only in its neighborhood, immediate or near, but worldwide. This acknowledgement guides its foreign and security policy. We want to be surrounded by strong nations that adhere to the global values as we do. We consider it to be our duty, having successfully left behind us a past of bloody wars in our continent the last century. We realize that instability in any given place affects and matters to us. So, and speaking as a soldier, we take the fight to the enemy. Where enemy is the root causes of the instability. In this context, by providing assistance to Mali, the Central African Republic, and Somalia to tackle the challenges they face, and maybe the near future to other countries in Africa and in Asia, we also equip the European Union with consecutive layers of protection against both the prevailing of threats and their aftermath. In fact, we are building a security belt, a zone where stability and security will prevail, opening the roads for investments, development and growth to come, resulting in job opportunities and minimizing migratory flows. To cut it short, our objective is to provide forward defense in a constructive manner, some thousands of miles southern of our physical borders. This posture enjoys quite an acceptance, as demonstrated by the different partners that joined forces with us in this endeavor. Nations as distant as Chile or South Korea, nations as neutral as Switzerland, Arabic nations as Jordan are our partners in this effort. The EU military missions and operations should not be regarded as a standalone project, however. They are incorporated in a wider concept consistent with the superpowers' way of engaging. The EU global strategy identifies 3 specific strategic priorities to be comprehensively put forward: to respond to external crises, to build the capacities of partners affected by crisis and fragility, and third, to protect Europe. Together with the civilian missions, development projects, or financial funds, they form what we call the integrated approach. This new concept I described also before, that guides European Union engagement, the concept, as I mentioned before, is very important. There is no doubt that security and development go always hand in hand. There cannot be security without development and job opportunities for all. In the same way, there can never be development outside a safe and secure environment. Therefore, following the integrated approach, the European Union applies a specific and unique mix of the numerous instruments of foreign and financial policy it possesses in agreement with the receiving country. The military is one of those tools available to the political leadership toolbox when they decide about the composition and the appropriate use of each component. If we analyze the way the European Union engages with external conflicts and crises and how it applies the various tools, we would see that the military participation is limited but significant to the whole European effort. The European Union, ladies and gentlemen, is not a military alliance. It's not a military institution. It's not something like NATO. It's not even NATO-light. It's a financial and political organization which has a significant, or even not so significant, military part, a military tool. I wouldn't give it more than 10%, but you will see and you will feel that it is important. With the demand of our citizens for more security as a driving factor, the European Union embarked in an endeavor to augment its capabilities in this domain, in the military domain. Some people fear that this will lead to more integration, and others warn against losing national sovereignty to Brussels. I argue that this is the only way forward through genuine cooperation. Any attempts to go on separate, lonely ways are condemned to fail, as they will fail to correspond to the transnational nature of the very threats they will try to tackle. No nation, no matter how strong it may be, can tackle the sum of the threats and challenges on its own. What we have achieved up to now, we did it together. Our strength derives from our unity, and together we have to go on. In this context, I argue that working towards a stronger European security and defense leads nowhere close to losing sovereignty, as some fear. To the contrary, it is all about preserving and protecting our way of living. Collective efforts are the new norm. Collectivity in the military should not be confused with adding figures of the respective defense inventories of the member states. It is true that putting in a spreadsheet numbers of main defense articles, we would come up with some very interesting findings. European Union member states can assemble a force of 1,700 fighter planes or 120 frigates. They constitute a massive military power of 1.4 million soldiers. If we examine the defense budgets, EU member states invest more than 200 billion euros annually, the second biggest defense budget in the world. But this is too simplistic. Numbers can lie. The spreadsheet will fail to reveal that the fighter planes consist of no less than 20 different types, variants or configurations of aircraft. This is too much. The same applies for the composition of the naval force and the frigates. This is also too much. If we examine the output, these 200 billion in terms of defense capabilities, we will not be satisfied. Techno-economically speaking, this is a failure. And finally, it will hide the lack of the backbone of these forces, an EU command and control structure that would transfer individual units allocated to the European Union to a coherent force that will execute the mandate given. This has to change. We need to better organize our home now, and this is exactly what we are doing with the implementation plan of the new EU global strategy. I will not get into details with this. The only thing I will tell you that we have been accused of trying to duplicate NATO. This is not true. We have complementary roles with NATO, and this is what we will do. They will be responsible for the defense, and they are responsible for the defense of Europe, and we are responsible for the protection and the borders, with the coast guards, with Frontex, with immigration. The big thing, it will be NATO. We will be the protectors of our territory. not the defenders. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union is evolving to tackle the contemporary threats and challenges it faces. Nevertheless, we are not, and we do not intend to become a military superpower. We do not need to overreact, and we do not want to jeopardize the nature of our societies. We do not also want to duplicate already existing multi-international military institutions or structures. As I have explained to you, we have the capacity, but we have chosen to apply instead an integrated approach to our problems and concerns. This does not mean that we give away our strength. It means that we already consider ourselves strong and we intend to get stronger. It is going to be a long process because of the careful and well-planned steps that we need to take. And of course, we do not want to take this long road alone. Like-minded nations, like Israel, based on the same values and the same threat concerns, are expected to join us. As our High Representative, Madam Mogherini, stated recently addressing our member states, together we are a superpower. I would like to add, together with our friends, are even bigger and stronger. And we have to be stronger and we have to be very close to each other for the benefit of our societies and for the benefit of our citizens. Thank you very much.